Good morning, and thank you so much again for listening. This is Mark Morris. We're back with Douglas, and Douglas has been sharing on some past radio programs about Matthew 24, Matthew 25. It's amazing what Jesus tells all of us when he comes here in the flesh. He tells his disciples and he tells the people what is going to happen in the end times, in the tribulation, right before the tribulation. And the one main thing that Jesus Christ says to all of us is we must be ready. We must be watching. We must be careful. And when you
That's
go
right.
on and you read in Matthew 24 what Jesus begins to lay out about the end times, about the great tribulation, what's going to happen, you want to be ready. And this passage is so important for us to live with it before us every day. We really should have these scriptures laid in our heart every day because God says that his judgment is coming on the earth. And today we want to talk about how serious the judgment is. And we'll be going through these scriptures in Matthew 24. We're going to be picking up around Matthew 24, verse 21. In the prior programs that Douglas did, he covered Matthew 24, 1 through 21. If you'd like to see those programs, you can go back to our website. Our website is www.wordoffaithfellowship.org, and you'll see it there with Douglas. But let's go ahead and get started. We're picking back up in verse 21 when Jesus Christ is telling about the end of the world as we know it. So, Douglas, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here again. And Mark is very correct in what God is saying in these chapters here, 24 and then in 25. But in 24, God always gives a wake-up call and then a warning and then his judgment. And I think we've not paid really attention many times to his warnings, to his wake-up calls. For example, when the planes hit the Trade Center
Right.
in New York City, hit the Twin Towers, we were not prepared for that. We were not ready for that. We weren't expecting that. And yet it happened, and we saw the panic that it caused,
Right.
not only in this nation, but in the whole world.
Yes.
Because it changed the whole world's thinking about how things were going to be and how things are. And then we've come to this, up till today, to the pandemic, the COVID-19 virus that's out there. And I think the enemy intended intentionally to bring this upon us, but I think they've lost control of it themselves. There's no healing for this at this time in the natural, and God's and it's causing great distress and
Right.
concern in the world. I mean, hundreds of nations are concerned. It's affected everybody, and this is getting into the end times here. In
Right.
Matthew 24, we left off last time. We were talking about in verse 15 when you see the appalling sacrilege, the abomination that astonishes and makes desolate, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place. Let the reader take notice and ponder and consider and heed this. Then let those that are in Judea flee to the mountains. So what we've already seen briefly is wars. We've heard about wars and rumors of wars, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation, light and darkness against each other, kingdom against kingdom, famines of long duration, pestilences, and earthquakes. Many earthquakes have happened in the last year, even in the last months. But they don't tell you about all that. But the Bible tells us we better get ready because these things are happening.
And you're talking about it in the early part of Matthew 24. Jesus is talking about the birth pangs.
Yes.
And these are all things that he says will happen before the Great Tribulation comes.
That's right.
We're seeing these things right now.
That's
you
right.
know, that talks about pestilence. We're seeing this virus that has been so serious.
It's been so serious. And all these things are coming upon us. And yet Jesus said, but yet this is not the end. This is just the beginning. So if we're not prepared now, we better really shake ourselves, begin to read the Bible, go to church, fellowship with fellow believers. Let's talk about these things. Let's get familiar with these things because we want to be ready because the days are growing short. And he says the sacrilege, the great, the abomination, 3.5 years into Daniel's 70th week, there's going to be peace in the world, but at the end of 3.5 years of that 7-year period, the Antichrist is going to turn and attack the people. He's going to take over the temple where the Jews have been going back to their practices, and he's going to set his image up in the temple. He's going to declare himself to be God. You can read that in Thessalonians. Actually declare himself to be God, and he's going to try to take over the whole world. And he says, when you see this happening, because this is a time of, there's not words to put. I almost feel like Paul, when he went to heaven, he didn't have words to describe what he saw. There are not words to describe how awful, how devastating, how penetrating the intensity of these days are going to be, what we're going into, especially when the Antichrist has come out and taken over and called himself God, and what he tries to do to the world. And it says when that happens, in verse 16, it says, let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains. And I wanted to just quickly look in the book of Revelation in chapter 12, what it means there. He said, flee to the mountains. And let me read on here before we go to Revelation. But he said, let them that are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down and go into the house to take anything. You're on top of the house. Don't even go downstairs and grab a jacket or a little extra maybe money or whatever you think you might need. Don't do it because it's so serious. When he says flee to the mountains, when he says come down from the housetop, don't go into the house to take anything, and let them that is in the field not turn back to get an overcoat. He's talking about take it serious this time and get out of there.
Right.
Get out of Jerusalem. Get out of town. And he said, and he goes on to say here, alas for the women who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in the winter. In the wintertime, it's going to be cold, rainy, possibly even snow, and it's not going to be easy to travel. So he said, pray that this doesn't happen in the winter. He goes on to say, and pray that your flight won't be on the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath there's not a lot of movement with the Jews in Israel and in Jerusalem. And if they all of a sudden see all these people leaving town, it's going to draw attention to the armies that are surrounded and to the Antichrist to try to stop the Jews from fleeing to the mountains. And in fleeing to the mountains there, in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 6, the woman here is Israel. And if you back up there, it talks about that. And she gives birth to Israel gives birth to the Messiah, and so she went forth. Verse 5 it says, and she brought forth a male child, one who is destined to shepherd and rule all the nations with an iron staff, that is a scepter. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman herself fled into the wilderness. Now listen to this. This is God's trying to wake us up and warn us, and he always makes provision for his people. Isn't that wonderful?
That's right, it is.
I mean, isn't that wonderful? He always makes provision for us. And the woman herself fled into the desert wilderness where she has a retreat. Now listen to this. Where she has a retreat prepared for her by God.
Yes.
Who in advance is always preparing and taking hold and taking care of his people.
Right.
So she flees into the desert wilderness where she has a retreat prepared for her by God, in which she is to be fed and kept safe for 3.5 years, or 1,260 days, or 42 months. Now that's amazing to me.
Right.
That God has a place prepared for his people to escape when they leave town, that he's already prepared for them. That's amazing to me.
It is.
They can go there. They can be safe.
Yeah.
There's going to be food, provision. I mean, God is going to take care of them if they will obey the warning and the wake-up call and leave, as he said. Don't worry about anything. I mean, just go. He'll provide the clothes.
Well, and he's going to do that for us today, Douglas.
That's right.
You know, we're in this time now where Jesus talks about the birth pangs. We're not there yet. We're not in the tribulation, but there are things happening now in the world, and God will do the same thing for us now. I know in that Revelations 12, it's talking about these last 3.5 years, but God's the same today. We can trust him today, just like he took care of the people that will turn their heart to him in Revelations. He's going to take care of us today. He's going to prepare a safe place for us today. And Douglas, just for some of the listeners out there, so we can give some kind of time reference here, when Jesus is talking about this in Matthew 24, verse 15, about the appalling sacrilege that takes its seat in the holy place, just for a reference for those listening, Daniel referred to this, and you can go to Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapter 11, Daniel chapter 12, and this is all consistent with the Old Testament. It's consistent with what Jesus said, and it actually is consistent with Revelations. And these are some of the three main passages. Daniel, we have Matthew 24, and then we have Revelations. What this is talking about is the Great Tribulation, and we're in the time frame right now that Jesus is talking about is into the 3.5 years into the tribulation. And as Douglas referenced, the first 3.5 years, as you can study this in Daniel, you can study this in Revelations, talks about the Antichrist setting up his government, taking over the world. We'll talk about this a little bit. We don't have time today, but we believe that the true Christians are going to be raptured before this happens, before the 7-year tribulation. Yes. We believe that the true believers will be raptured. But who is going to be left is all those who are not the true believers, those who have not been serving Jesus with their whole heart. And this is who's going to be left for the Great Tribulation. And then what we see here is we are now in the middle of the Great Tribulation when the Antichrist takes that place in Jerusalem, and he sets up his kingdom. And that is when we begin the Great Tribulation judgments and plagues and destruction. And as Douglas read, that's when the word is coming in verse 16, 17, 18, 19, where Jesus is saying, get out of there, because destruction is coming. And we're going to share with you how serious it is. Why did Jesus say you don't even have time to, when you're leaving your housetop to go down, you don't have time to grab anything. Just get out.
That's
and
serious.
This is such a serious time. And as Douglas is sharing, this is so serious that we have in our heart before us what is really going to happen.
Yes. And again, you might ask yourself, well, what does this have to do with me? Well, because in the Bible, God always deals with his people first, and then the other people. In other words, the Jew first, and then the Gentile.
Right.
And you can see that in Romans. He's dealing with his people, but he's also dealing with us. And what does that? How does this affect me? How does this apply to me? Well, when the tribulation, all this is that's happening right now, leading up to the rapture and the tribulation time, is affecting us right now.
Right.
You might wonder, is the Antichrist alive now? I'm sure he is, because as we'll see, when Israel became a nation back in May of 1948, I think May 19th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at Tel Aviv Museum, David Ben-Gurion got up and he declared Israel to be a sovereign, independent nation. That fig tree was, and we'll see that, was planted, and from that day forward, it's beginning to blossom. And we are a part. This is all part of us. And how does that affect me today? This is all affecting us today. The globalists, the world people that want, they're using this pandemic and all these disasters that happen to try to step in to take over. And one man's going to have to get a hold of all this, and he is being prepared. He may know it now, he may not know it now, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say, but he's out there, and I believe strongly, as Mark does, that we are the generation that's going to see the coming of the Lord, because it talks about when you see all these things happening together, that generation is going to be the one to see it. So, as I said, this is going to be so intense. In verse 21, it says, for then there will be great tribulation, affliction, distress, and oppression, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be again. It's going to be so bad. It will never happen like this again. And if those days had not been shortened, no human being would endure and survive but for the sake of God's elect, his chosen ones, those days will be shortened. Meaning that not less hours in a day or less days in a month, but if these days were to go on indefinitely, nobody would make it. So God's not going to let that happen. He's on a time schedule. He's going to keep to that schedule, and he's going to come and stop and protect his people. And so in verse 23, he says, if anyone says to you then, behold, here is the Christ, or there he is, don't believe it. Now we've already heard up here in chapter, verse 3 and 4, and down here a little bit further, and now this is the third time in this chapter he gives warning to those who are on the earth. If anyone says to you about false Christ and false prophets coming forth, don't believe them. Do not believe them, and that's been happening our whole lifetime. Right. More and more, there's been false prophets, false people that are even declaring themselves to be Christ. So Jesus is saying, see, verse 25, I have warned you beforehand. So then, and then he goes on again, if they say to you, behold, he is in the wilderness desert, don't believe it. And don't go there. If they tell you, behold, he's in the secret places, in the inner rooms, don't believe them. Because verse 27, for just as the lightning flashes from east and shines and is seen as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. In other words, he's not going to be in some secret place. God does everything in the open here. Everyone's going to see when he comes. Just like the lightning, when you see the lightning flash on a stormy night, if you're down by the sea or out in by a big lake or in an open area, that lightning flashes from one end to the other, and there's no mistaking about it. You see it. And so the coming of the Son of Man will be like that, like lightning flashing from east to west. Every man will see it. And then he goes on to say, wherever there is a fallen body, that is a corpse, the vultures will be flocked together. And what that's talking about there, and really, in the book of Revelation, there's another verse that relates to this right here. In chapter 19, at the second coming, verse 21 said verse 17, it says, then I saw a single angel stationed in the sun's light, and with a mighty voice he shouted to the birds that fly across the sky, come, gather yourselves together for the great supper of God. Back here in Matthew 24, where the fallen body or the corpses, the vultures will be gathered together. The angel's inviting all the vultures to the great supper of God. And it says that in verse 21, the rest of mankind were killed by the, and we'll look at that in just a minute, were killed by the sword that issues from the mouth of him who is mounted on the horse. And all the birds fed ravenously and glutted themselves with their flesh. I mean, it's going to be so unbelievable. And I'll just mention this in chapter 14 of Revelation, in verse 19. It says this, it says, so the angel swung his sickle on the earth and stripped the grapes and gathered the vintage for the wine of the earth and cast it into the huge winepress of God's indignation and wrath. And the grapes of the winepress were trodden outside the city, and the blood poured from the winepress, reaching as high as horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia, or about one commentary said 180 miles. Amplified Bible here says 200 miles. I mean, can you imagine the blood being as deep as that? Could be about 4 feet tall, possibly high, 180 to 200 miles. It's going to be awful.
We can't even comprehend it.
We can't even comprehend it. And that this verse here, wherever the fallen body is, it's just going to be devastating. And then it says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not shed its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn and beat their breasts and lament in anguish. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory, in brilliancy and splendor. Now that's quite a picture, and there's a lot of places in the Bible that talk about that. I think Mark has got one in
Revelation 6.
In chapter 6.
Verse 12, actually, it goes right with that. It says, when he, the Lamb, broke open the sixth seal, I looked, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun grew black as sackcloth of hair. The moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky dropped to the earth like a fig tree shedding its unripe fruit out of season when shaken by a strong wind. And the sky rolled up like a scroll and vanished, and every mountain and island was dislodged from its place. Now, this is hard to even imagine, because this is, as Douglas says, there's no words to describe what is being said here. Our minds can't even comprehend what is going to happen in these end times, but it's going to happen. And we're talking about the sun that is going to be darkened, the moon's going to be darkened. We're talking about all of the stars and the heavenly beings, and it says here in Revelation 6 that it says it's going to actually be rolled up, sort of like when you roll up your window shade or something and you pull that, it rolls up. This is what's going to happen to when you look out at night and you see all of those stars and those heavenly beings. This is how serious things will be at this time. It will be rolled up. The heavens will be rolled up. And Matthew 24 says it, and Revelations is consistent with it. I'm going to read to you one more passage in Isaiah that makes it so clear It's actually Isaiah 13, verse 9. It says, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, fierce with wrath and raging anger, to make the land and the earth a desolation, and to destroy out of it sinners. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened as its rising, and the moon will not shed its light." And then it says, "And I, the Lord, will punish the world for its evil." So we see this heavenly darkening going on. You see it consistently. And what's amazing, if you read on in Revelation chapter 6, verse 15, it says, "Then the kings of the earth and their tribal men and their magistrates and their military chiefs and all the wealthy and strong and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they called to the mountains and the rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the deep-seated indignation of the wrath of the Lord.'" So this is what we're going to see. It is going to happen.
It's going to happen, and really, this is happening to get our attention. This is not just a natural thing that's happened. We're going to work our way through it. We're going to be another 1,000 years. God's trying to wake us up that the day of the Lord is fast approaching. The second coming of Jesus is fast approaching. Whether we understand that or believe it or not, it is what it says it is. And God, when he says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. He is coming back. It's going to bring such fear and devastation that people are going to cry out for the rocks, the mountains, to fall on them, to hide them from the face of the one that they're going to have to come face to face with. They don't want to see that. It said that death will even flee. You won't be able to kill yourself. You won't be able to get away from it. You're not going to get away from. There'll be no escape from coming face to face with the Lord Jesus Christ at the second coming. This is about judgment. Where he just read in chapter 6 there, let me read in chapter 16. It said, the seventh angel emptied out his bowl, in verse 17, into the air, and a mighty voice came out of the sanctuary of heaven from the throne of God, saying, "It is done. It is over. It is all accomplished. It has come." And there followed lightnings and flashes and loud rumblings and peals of thunder and a tremendous earthquake. John is informed that there'll be nothing like it has ever occurred since men dwelt on the face of the earth. So severe and far-reaching was that earthquake. And the mighty city was broken into three parts. And the cities, listen to this, and the cities of the nations. It's going to be like God just takes earth and shakes it. Moscow, Sydney, Australia, Charlotte, New York, Singapore, all the cities of the nations are going to fall. That's unbelievable. They're going to fall, and the mighty, and it says, and God kept in mind the mighty Babylon to make her drain the cup of his furious wrath and indignation. Now listen, my brother lives in Hawaii. This concerns me when I read this, every time I read it. Every island fled and no mountains could be found. Every island.
Right.
Imagine going down to Charleston, the islands that people go there, and they have nice houses out there, and they go to get away. Every island's going to flee. They're going to sink. They're going to be gone. The mountains are going to crumble. That's devastation that we don't understand. We can't put a definition on it. We can't put an interpretation. It's just too big for us to get a hold of.
And we're out of time now.
We are?
And we're going to pick back up. Douglas, it went by so fast, but we're going to pick back up. And on the next program, we're in the middle of talking about the Great Tribulation, the end times. God is warning his people. He's warning you. He's warning me today, now, so our hearts can be right. And this is such a serious topic. So I hope you will tune in. Next time we're
Yes.
here on this radio program, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 8:30 to 9. Come back to the next program. Douglas and I are going to be back, and we're going to pick back up. Thank you very much.